Welcome to Women in Retail Talks, a podcast from Women in Retail Leadership Circle. Our mission is to foster leadership development for our membership community of women executives at leading retailers and brands. We've updated our podcast format to better serve the wants and needs of our community. Our refreshed podcast will feature in-depth interviews with female C-suite executives from enterprise retail organizations who've defined their own career success and made their way to the metaphorical corner office. The episodes will include stories of professional growth, leadership development, personal journeys, and more. Every other Wednesday, you'll get real advice and valuable lessons from these powerhouse women. We hope you enjoy our show, and we welcome your feedback.
Hello, and welcome to Women in Retail Talks, the podcast where C-suite executive women in the retail space share their stories of professional growth, leadership development, personal journeys, and more. I'm Marie Albajes at Women in Retail Leadership Circle, a membership-based community of executive women at leading retailers and brands. Today, I'm so thrilled to be joined by Tricia Smith, the global CEO of Anthropologie. So before joining Anthropologie in April of 2021, Tricia served as Executive Vice President and Chief Merchandising Officer of Tilly's for 2 years, but she spent almost 3 decades at Nordstrom, which I'm so excited to talk to you about. And in this episode, we're discussing Tricia's career path, how she found mentors at Nordstrom, and how she went after the positions that she wanted. So Tricia, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. Really excited to be joining you.
Yeah, so let's get right into it. Before we talk a little bit about your background at Nordstrom, I want to hear what drew you to Anthropologie, what were you brought on to do, what your responsibilities are. Just give me a little bit of background on that.
Sure. So I basically oversee all the functions of business, both in North America and abroad, for the Anthropologie group. That includes the Anthropologie brand, Anthro Living, which is the home and decor division of the company, Terrain, which is our home and garden brand, and Beholden, which is our wedding and bridesmaid and bridal business. So I think, I was really brought on board to lead the team to develop digital first strategies that attract a new generation of Anthropologie shoppers. So I think the Anthropologie brand has been incredibly successful. I think it's probably one of the most creative brands out there. But there was an opportunity to really propel the brand's strength, I think, to lay out a long-term strategy for growth and really look across all of those businesses to be able to lead the teams to deliver a phase of greater growth, I think, that the brand had experienced.
So that obviously was appealing to you. I know you were at Tilly's before that, and then, long history at Nordstrom. So is this something that you had done before? Was this kind of, you were looking at it as this new challenge where you were kind of digging in and learning new things?
Yeah, I think, I had only been at Tilly's for a year and a half, so I really wasn't looking. It was 4 months into starting at Tilly's, COVID hit. And so I really, it was interesting now being at a smaller company, kind of leading through the challenges of COVID, but also like the silver lining of that was incredibly rewarding. And I think I learned so much having to kind of touch so many aspects of the company that I likely wouldn't have leading through the challenges I think that COVID presented if I had still been at Nordstrom. But I really admired the Anthropologie brand. And I think that what really, obviously the opportunity to become the global CEO, but also I loved the idea that it was really a lifestyle brand and it touched so many aspects of a customer's life. So, I've kind of, my merchant background and buying background was always in fashion. And I love the fact that this was kind of a full home design opportunity to think about end to end, a broader aspect of the customer's lifestyle. So I think it presented an opportunity to kind of take what I had learned and move into a brand that I felt maybe a little bit more connected to in terms of what I was able to accomplish in leading across so many different categories than what I was doing.
Yeah. So at this point in your career, are you looking for that new challenge? I mean, we can go through, all of the positions that you held at Nordstrom, but at what point do you say like, okay, how else can I grow and learn? Is that something that you're thinking about constantly as you're kind of looking at your career path in the past and your career path looking forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I think about it, at least for myself and potentially for others, is across the course of your career, I think at least I need to always find an opportunity to feel like I have that right balance of learning and leading at the same time. And I had incredible opportunities to learn, the business of retail and the art of retail, arguably from one of the best retailers out there, and then was given incredible latitude to be able to lead and take on larger roles and challenges. And that's part of the reason I think that I stayed at Nordstrom as long as I did, because I felt, every 2 or 3 years, I was constantly learning something new and then given an opportunity to lead at the same time. And so I think as long as I'm always feeling challenged and I'm always learning something, and then given the opportunity to lead at the same time, I'm incredibly satisfied, I think, in what I'm doing. I'm probably unique in that I stayed with one company as long as I did. So I'm not always someone that's looking for what's new and next. And really wasn't expecting to make either one of those moves at the time that I did. But I think that both of those opportunities presented, a new challenge and a new opportunity to learn something new. And that it kind of reached a point at Nordstrom where, I didn't really feel like I was learning as much as I was leading, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember you and I talking a few weeks ago about, the question being always being brought up of, how do you plan your career? How did you do you have kind of a vision for how you wanted your career to go? And looking at your experience at Nordstrom, it was like every few years you challenged yourself and got that new position. You started out as a buyer, if I'm correct. And when you left after 3 decades, you were the executive vice president and general merchandise manager of women's designer, active apparel, and lingerie. So I'd love to hear any advice you have for working your way up in the company and knowing when it's the right time to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I actually started at Nordstrom even before that, but I hate to say 3 decades, it makes me feel old. um, I actually started on the sales floor at Nordstrom as a teenager, and was really given, I loved fashion. I loved retail at an early age. I wasn't one of those people that went to school to do something different and fell into retail. I loved it, and I was passionate about it from the very beginning. But I also loved the culture, of Nordstrom, and from the, kind of the first day starting, the ideas that it was so simple, right? No rules, no handbook, just do what's best for the customer. Really, I think that resonated with me. The company was a lot less structured then. I remember getting promoted in my first buying role. I was barely 21 years old and being put on a plane the next day, in which I grew up in Southern California. I'd never even been to New York. So, I'm a young person on a plane, my first buying role. And there wasn't that much structure, honestly. I had to learn from my peers. But I loved that they placed that trust in me and saw something in me. And that really gave me the confidence to drive and succeed. And I never looked back. And I think that confidence then and the new opportunities that I was given to be successful and to deliver results, I kind of built on those, and oftentimes would make sure that I was communicating to my mentors, my leaders, that what my aspiration was of what I wanted to do and why I thought I could be successful in doing it. So I think I probably took played a bigger part, I guess, in what my next steps were, because I was able to communicate, what I wanted to do next and why I felt like what I had learned in that previous role prepared me for the next role. I think, I guess oftentimes when I'm asked this question, I always think if you're never thinking about how you're kind of charting the course of your career. I never expected, early on in my career that this would be where I was. But I think as you're thinking about your next roles, I'll oftentimes think about or kind of give advice to people that think about how you're writing your story, right? And so how did your previous position prepare you for the next? And then why does that make sense become, kind of the building blocks of what your career becomes over time. So sometimes I think roles are, kind of opportunistic or unintended and unexpected, and that's okay. But I think really making sure that you're thinking through how your current role prepares you for your next role, I think was part of why I was able to take on bigger roles and grow into the company. And I'm incredibly grateful for it. There came a point in time where, my last role at Nordstrom, I don't even think that they could have expanded the scope any further, right? In my role, I was running a $3 billion business and supporting, businesses from the kids department all the way to designer and fine luxury apparel and traveling internationally. So it was incredibly rewarding and fulfilling. But as I mentioned before, I was really ready, for the next. And so, after a long period of time, I kind of made the tough decision to leave. But I think, the biggest thing was, I think I felt like I was in the driver's seat of my career, and I was able to ask for the things that I felt like I needed, and share what my aspirations and my ambitions were. And I had incredible support, system along the way in order to be able to do it.
Yeah, what a great feeling. And there's some great advice in there. You mentioned, being proactive and having those conversations with your mentors, with your supervisors. Any advice for bringing that kind of thing up to say, like, talk to your supervisor about the next step in your career? I think a lot of people get stuck in their roles because they're afraid to have those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I think, kind of similar to what we just talked about, I think you really have to own the process, right, of mentorship. And I'm hugely supportive of structured mentorship programs, but I really believe that some of the most effective mentor and mentee relationships come from those where you can seek out someone that is either doing something that you want to know a little bit more about, providing leadership that you admire, and, seeking that person out, and honestly not being afraid to ask. I think oftentimes people feel like, someone's not going to want to kind of take on, another mentor, and that they're constantly inundated with people asking. I get asked, a fair amount, but it's not in an overwhelming amount. Like, I'm always impressed with, like, our interns, there's maybe one or two in internship programs that I've had, many companies that seek me out to say, hey, can I sit down and talk to you? And I think oftentimes they're nervous to do it, but, I think that kind of proactive, confidence to bring forward and speak to someone that you feel like you can learn something from, I think is important. And I think you have to not be afraid to state what you want to learn. I mean, my whole career was in merchandising and buying. And I remember, Blake Nordstrom, who's no longer here, unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago, gave me incredible kind of access to learn the business beyond buying. And I had lots of conversations about, I want to take on larger roles. I'd love to run this company someday. And so he gave me the opportunity to sit on advisory boards, budget review committees. I, reviewed the budgets and the P&Ls of all of the business units within the company, and kind of learned that process on the job. But I asked for it, to be honest, and then I ended up in a place, when, really, really enjoying, leading the business side of the business side of retail, along with, buying and merchandising, but felt like I needed another experience, kind of outside of Nordstrom. I remember, saying to the Nordstrom executive team that, all of my mentors, and all of my, kind of colleagues and connections that I have are either someone that works at Nordstrom or someone that's selling something to Nordstrom. And so I had said I felt like I needed an experience, and they gave me an incredible opportunity to take a sabbatical and go get my executive business degree at Stanford. And it's a huge vote of confidence in the fact that they were okay letting me step outside the business for a period of time, which they didn't have to do, but that experience really kind of changed me in terms of what I saw, and the kind of lifelong connections that I made, and then just opened my eyes, I think, beyond both Nordstrom and retail, honestly, like how more broadly across multiple industries, companies and industries where we're dealing with innovation and disruption and those types of things. And so it kind of continued my my quest for learning, I guess, and became a real pivotal point for me to really then understand what I really wanted to do next.
Yeah.
It's a long answer to your question. Sorry.
No, that's incredible. And I think, the lesson there is, what's the worst that can happen is they say no. Like, they're not going to fire you for asking, for a sabbatical or for, that next position or for that advice. So, going into that with a mindset of like, if they say no, then I continue with my work and I find another way to do it.
Yeah. And I think, oftentimes I think there's not that many people doing that, I guess. And in my career, look, I think in any company, you often have, a plethora of people, right, that can identify problems, right? But not that many that can like bring forward like solutions and ideas, and really declare, why and how they can solve a problem for a company, or, take on more and get better results. And I just think, there's a learned confidence there, I think, that comes from, being able to come forward and communicate those things. But, I think it's less common than people believe, and I guess I would say, kind of find a way to combat that fear of, what the answer might be. Because I think you're right. The last thing they can say is no. And trust me, there's plenty of times when I brought things forward and the answer was no. It wasn't always yes.
Right.
Yeah, but I just had to kind of continue to trust the process and trust myself that that I could continue to take on more.
Yeah, and I feel like, and this brings me to my next question, is that women particularly have more trouble with this. And I was wondering, because a lot of our podcast guests, our focus is on women in retail. So throughout your career, were there any challenges you faced specifically because you were a woman?
It's interesting, when I really kind of reflect back on that. I mean, I grew up having no idea that women faced challenges achieving anything that they sought out to do. I was raised by an entrepreneurial mother that started answering phones for a small insurance agency and ended up buying that agency and built an incredibly successful brokerage, that my sister runs today. So I didn't have any, I didn't see any kind of roadblocks, I guess, as I was imagining, as a woman, what I wanted to accomplish. But and I now know, like, there was many times where my mom was the only woman at conferences, and my dad, was the only male attending, what quote unquote were the wives, activities at these conferences that she attended. So she really, kind of was a bit of a trailblazer in an industry where there was literally no women, running these brokerages. But I quickly realized that wasn't the case for a lot of other women, and wanted to provide access and opportunity for women to succeed. And I remember having succession planning discussions, where so much of the emphasis was on, how great it was that I was a successful, female leader. And I didn't love that. Like, I wanted to be considered a successful leader, not a successful female leader. And in my experience, I would say one of the toughest experience I think I had was, I was really driven to become a member of the executive team, at Nordstrom. And after the head of HR had retired, and at that time was the only woman on the executive team, I was asked to consider stepping into that role. And I knew, like, in my heart that, like, my merchant background, with my merchant background, I wouldn't have been asked to lead that function, of the company if I wasn't a woman, and, with the desire to ensure that there was, more women, and a commitment, admirably so, to make sure that there was enough women on the executive team. But I knew it wasn't the role for me, and it wasn't something that I was passionate about. So I turned it down, and was probably one of the harder decisions, I think, that I've ever had to make, because my goal up until that point was really to be on the executive team. but it all worked out. I went on to become more successful, with my merchant roles. And the company hired a woman that was far more capable, than I was to hire it to run the HR function. But, it was a bit of a journey for me because I started early in my career being a little bit offended, but then learning over time, that we do as women need to, kind of create access and opportunity. And then went on to actually start what was the Women in Leadership, what they weren't called employee resource groups then. They were, it was, kind of stemmed from a small group of women that, would ask for kind of mentoring discussions, turned into kind of brown bag lunches, and conferences and getting access to other female leaders in the company. And then it evolved into what became the first, employee resource group that I was fortunate enough to be the executive sponsor for at Nordstrom, for women. But it was a bit of a journey for me, I think, being raised the way that I was and really kind of wanting to fight for the recognition of myself as a successful, like, professional, right? Not just a successful female professional.
Right. Yeah. Not limiting yourself into a box or into one direct path to, a lot of women, I think, would say, if this is my only path to the executive team, then so be it. I guess I'll be in HR. So it's incredible that you were able to kind of go and make your own path.
It was a little terrifying because I actually wasn't sure how they were going to respond, and it was more like just an exploratory conversation. I think they were trying to get a read for me as to whether or not I'd be interested in that. But it was also really hard because they had invested so much in me, and I almost felt like I was letting them down by not stepping into that role because I knew what would be good for the company, right? For a woman that started on the sales floor to now be leading the HR function, and so there was almost like a bit of guilt, in saying that this was not the best decision, for me at the time, and kind of placing that above, for 25 years decisions that I had made what I thought was best for the company. So it was hard. That was a tough kind of moment for me.
Yeah, and I feel like so many people are grateful that you made the decision that you did and that you put yourself first. So that's incredible. The last question I want to ask you about is a little bit more about your mentorship, since you've championed this for Nordstrom and in your career moving forward. So I guess my question is, where have you seen this done right, where someone approaches you and asks for you to be their mentor? How can someone do that successfully?
I think honestly, just making the effort to reach out. I mentioned literally some of my favorite days are spent, getting to know interns, kind of hearing their presentations and just talking to them, right? I think I get as much out of those discussions, I think, hopefully as they do, in that, they are the next generation, right, of employees, and really recognizing how much has changed. My path is not the same as what, others are today. There's so many things, just even in the last few years that have changed around, figuring out how to, balance, work from home versus, working in the office, and figuring out how to balance, a family, if that's the path that you want to take, along with, continuing to grow in your career. So I don't really have any kind of formal advice. I think, if there's opportunities to join, in employee resource groups and companies that are committing to, and honestly, I think leading, taking the opportunity to lead, they're employee led, right? So I think that the opportunity to step up and create access, not only for yourself, but for others, and taking a leading role there. But I think the first step is to just kind of put yourself in the driver's seat, really identify who those people are that you think can help you, and ask, right? The only thing they can do is say no.
Right. Raise your hand if your company doesn't have an employee resource group. Be the first one to lead it, and then go after the CEO and ask them to help you and guide you with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that in so many ways, I place so much value in seeing those that are willing to, kind of step up and like I said, provide solutions to problems, right? And to help a company, deliver on something that's valuable to you as an employee, because it's likely valuable to the company as well. And so I think having that voice of the employee community, I think is respected and valued, I think, and will also can bring another kind of degree of recognition and awareness, I think, as you're kind of charting your course and developing, I think, your reputation.
Yeah. Incredible. Well, thank you so much for, so much advice given just in these last few minutes. And thank you for all of the work that you do as a mentor. And thank you so much for joining me, Tricia.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. It was wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. For more information on this podcast, please check out our podcast channel page at womeninretail.com/podcast for show notes. Women in Retail Talks is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. Make sure to subscribe on our podcast channel page as well. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a few moments to rate and review. To learn more about women in retail and become a member of this amazing community, visit womeninretail.com. Thanks, and until next time, this has been Women in Retail Talks.